The younger Paul is bringing all of his trouble into the boxing world, and we're surprised to say that his career hasn't been a total failure like his Disney one. He doesn't box under the UFC banner but arranges his own, and because of that, he has beef with Dana White, who owns and runs the UFC. Jake Paul is attempting to bait Dana White to take up his bet offer, and we have all the deets for you. First up, Jake's new and upcoming fight. The problem child's been having some trouble figuring out his next step in the boxing world. He's had to cancel 2 whole fights and was getting desperate. He was literally going after Andrew Tate, so you can imagine how badly he needed an opportunity. Well, all of his manifestations paid off. He got a fight with Anderson Silva, who was granted a professional boxing license to fight in Arizona on October 29th. Silva is a former middleweight UFC champion who retired but continues to fight. So far, he's boxed 4 times and won 3 of them. Now here's the catch. Silva is close to his 50s. He's 47 years old as of now, while Jake is at the ripe age of just 25. Fighting someone double your age and experience doesn't look so good for Paul, but Joe Rogan disagrees and shed some light on it. In his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, he said that this fight might be the only real one for Jake. Deciding to fight Silva is like taking a proper challenge and will definitely be a tough gig. So far, Paul has fought in 5 fights and won all of them with 4 knockouts. His recent win was through a knockout in the 6th round with Tyron Woodley in December of 2021. This fight, though, has been long anticipated and is one we can't wait for. Next up, Jake's back and forth with Dana White. The UFC is a professional space and a massive business. They have events rolling out one after the other and get a huge amount of pay-per-views. So imagine running this huge organization and getting asked about a rookie who finances and organizes his fights. And more importantly, a guy who's never stepped into the octagon. The pair have both made mean comments about each other in the past and have built a small rivalry. Recently, Dana White was at a press conference when he was asked about Jake Paul and his upcoming fight with Anderson Silva. Now, White doesn't give a crap about Jake usually, but this time, he seemed impressed with him. He went on to say that while he doesn't care about Jake, it's about time Jake had a real fight on his hands, regardless of how old Anderson is. But that's all the kindness he had in store, because when he was asked again, he explicitly requested that people stop asking him about Jake Paul. He has nothing to do with his business, doesn't fight for him, isn't even in the same sport, and refused to talk about him anymore. Following that, Jake's new offer to Dana White. It's pretty weird that Jake has nothing to say to his opponent, but takes every opportunity to poke the UFC bear. Just a couple of days ago, a press conference happened where Silva and Paul came face to face for the first time, but the headlines were of Dana and Jake instead. Why? Let's find out together. The social media influencer turned boxer laid out a challenge for the UFC president. He wants both of them to be involved in a bet. Now, this offer didn't just come out of thin air. Jake was responding to a claim that he would never face someone as experienced as Silva, who not only rules the MMA world, but now the boxing one too. Jake responded that White didn't think he'd take up this fight, so he called out Dana, saying that the UFC head is watching the conference right now and owes him $1 million from an alleged bet they made on his fight with Ben Askren. So Jake wants him to come out of hiding, stop being a bleep, make a bet, and pay up this time. This guy gets a kick out of drama. He's perfect for the sports world. The previous bet Jake mentioned was when White publicly made a statement saying that he's willing to bet a cool $1 million on the retired UFC fighter over Jake Paul. But unfortunately for him, Jake ended up knocking out Askren pretty badly. White later came out to say that there wasn't an official wager between them. Jake doesn't think so. Anywho, this time the younger Paul brother wants to put down $1 million at least and is willing to go as far up as $5 million, but doesn't think White has the guts to do it. Moving on, all of that is well and good, but why isn't Jake starting drama with his actual opponent? While Jake went off on White, it wasn't easy to ignore the fact that he was a complete gentleman towards Silva, his actual opponent. Yeah, the guy he's actually battling it out with. Paul had to say a lot about that too. He promised that there'd be absolutely no trash talk aimed at Silva because he's a true fighter that Paul respects, unlike his past opponents. So Silva's name alone got Jake to shut up for the first time. Or is Jake afraid of him? Jake explained that it has everything to do with the person he's fighting, and it gets a little PG-18 in its true essence. All of his previous opponents were bleep heads. If his opponents are as such, then he chooses to be one too and beat them down in the ring as people have seen him do before. But for him, Silva is the nicest guy, and he loves him. He still wants to knock him out, but respectfully. Well, the nice guy might not be so nice to Paul in the ring. Now, moving on to other related news that might interest you. First up, Jake wants to go after Nate Diaz soon. Nate Diaz is a popular UFC fighter who recently finished his official contract with a big win in the octagon, and he's eager to get into another sport and dominate it. Well, that naturally led to speculations that there might be talk between Diaz and Jake about fighting it out in the ring. Maybe after Silva, this will be Jake's next big fight. At a press conference for his bout with the Brazilian fighter Silva, Jake voiced for him to be a legend, but then he started grilling into Diaz instead. He said, "I will slap the Stockton out of him," referring to Nate Diaz's hometown, Stockton, California. Even though Paul is from Ohio, he declared himself to be the real king of Stockton and that Diaz needs to come and get the crown from him. He's every bit as dramatic as you'd expect him to be. When asked if Jake would want to face Diaz in MMA, he immediately refused to say that he's a boxer and isn't trained for the UFC. He aims to go undefeated and then retire, which would explain why he goes after smaller fighters or those out of his range. Next, Jake is set to copy Israel Adesanya's tactics for his fight. Jake Paul is looking for his 6th professional fight and win as he faces Anderson Silva, his toughest challenge to date. Silva is the first opponent who has a huge advantage over Jake, so it wasn't expected that this fight would happen. The fight will be 8 rounds of 3 minutes each. Both men weigh 187 pounds, just 2 pounds above the weight at which Silva was in his prime as the UFC champion. So to even come close to winning this fight, Paul will have to work much harder than he thinks, and he's already taking notes. The former vlogger will follow in the footsteps of his friend Adesanya, who fought against Silva in 2019 and won by unanimous decision. It's more like trash talking in the ring, which Paul is experienced in already. Adesanya has encouraged Silva to throw strikes and acted as though none of Silva's shots were working. Paul intends to do the same. It makes sense. If you're severely lacking in the physical aspect, then you might as well make it up by being annoying and hope it works. Last up, KSI fails to be better than Jake Paul. KSI's return to boxing was met with a lot of hurdles, like withdrawals and restructuring, but regardless, it managed to sell out the entire O2 Arena in London. Not only that, but it drew more PPV buyers than any other YouTube boxing event this year. But there was another issue that KSI overlooked. DAZN's pay-per-view had a double paywall system, where the viewers had to first subscribe to the streaming service and then pay to watch KSI's fight. So it's tough to calculate the views from around the world, but in the UK and Ireland, he got 230,000 buys. This is nothing compared to Jake Paul's buys, which were 500,000 alone for his fight with Ben Askren. He'll have to plan better next time if he hopes to do better. That's a wrap for this video. What do you think of Jake's offer to Dana? Should he take it? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos. See you at the next one.